So how long have you been a tenant lawyer?
86, so that's 24 years. I started out at Catholic Charities for a year, and then I've been in private practice ever since.
So Catholic. So you've been a good Catholic girl then for a while. Because didn't you represented those priests?
I represented the Jesuits, Westside Jesuits, Father Dan Berrigan and others, and I represent the Catholic worker.
Yeah.
Yes, I
see. One of those priests was my high school teacher.
Oh.
Actually, yeah. Oh man, I try to remember his name, but I saw him in court. But you weren't there, but Crasher was there. I saw him, and I was like, "Hey, I know you. Xavier High School."
So could be one of them, yeah.
So what is the difference between it's all the same law, landlord-tenant law, but what is the difference between representing landlords and representing tenants?
One big difference is for the landlord, it's a business, and legal expenses are part of the cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. Whereas for a tenant, often facing a thousands or tens of $1,000 legal bill is a catastrophe.
Once they've hired you, they have committed some funds, but what's most important is that tenants are more concerned about, let's stay on the budget because I might run out of money before we win this case.
Oh, absolutely.
So they're not thinking about just, do I have a winning case? They're thinking about, will I still be standing to get to the end of this case with my money?
Through?
Right?
90% of landlords appear in housing court with an attorney, and 90% of tenants don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, the other thing is, if you're unrepresented, the landlord statistically will most likely have a lawyer, so that landlord lawyer will tell the tenant, you may have to pay the landlord's legal fees, right? So to the tenant, is that a real threat?
Oh, it really can be. If the lease provides for legal fees.
Well, if you have no lease.
Without a lease, if you're a month-to-month tenant, say, there's really no threat of legal fees there.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of it depends.
It does.
So, if a landlord lawyer is telling you, yeah, you have to pay these legal fees.
A good question back is...
Maybe not, right?
Yeah, maybe not.
How does the tenant know? How does the tenant know whether this threat, that they would be liable for legal fees, whether this threat is real?
They could ask, what's the basis? They could ask the lawyer, they could ask the court attorney or the judge in a conference, what's the basis for that? And maybe make the landlord put up and say, the lease provides for it. Well, does it or doesn't it? They may not ever know to ask that question. Uh-huh. And people settle cases because they're afraid the risks are too great to litigate.
And most leases I've read say, if the landlord wins the housing court case or wins the litigation, then the landlord can sue for legal fees. Is that the whole truth right there? That if the landlord wins the case, the landlord wins the legal fees.
That's half the story. Because most leases, most standard form leases, were one-sided. They said that if the landlord sues, the landlord can recover fees. They usually didn't say if the tenant wins, the tenant can recover. So to kind of balance that out, make things more fair, legislature passed 234, early 80s, I believe, and that said that if the landlord sues you and loses, or if the tenant has to sue the landlord and wins, the tenant may recover their legal fees if their lease would entitle the landlord to recover fees.
Mm-hmm.
So the landlord gets its rights through the lease, but then the tenants get a somewhat mirror image right through the law.
The rules, once you know them, are fairly simple. A landlord lawyer could say, yeah, we're going to sue you for legal fees. Might be BS, but if you don't have a lease, that's BS. They can't get legal fees.
Not this way, yeah.
If you do have a lease, they might get legal fees. Might not. Now we got to read the lease. Now then, if you got in the lease that the landlord could get legal fees if the landlord wins, then RPL 234 says that if that provision is in there, then the statute provides that the tenant can collect legal fees if the tenant wins. So the tenant can come back to court and say, landlord lawyer, you threatened me with legal fees, but I can hire a tenant lawyer and I can recover legal fees on you if
Yes.
you lose, right? So, why is that important? Why did they pass that law?
I think to foster settlement, because if each side's got the same gun pointing at each other, then people see reason. People make settlements. No one wants to take the risk of getting hit with the double fees, their own and the other side's. And if each side is equally threatened by that, they're more likely to stop shooting and start talking and make a settlement.